It was supposed to be a routine night. Dr. Eliana Graves had pulled a dozen overnight shifts in her 15 years as an OB-GYN, and this one felt no different. Quiet halls, overworked nurses, and a low hum of fluorescent lights in the labor and delivery ward at St. Augustine Medical Center in New Orleans. She had just finished reviewing patient charts when the trauma call came through. Pregnant female, late third trimester, presenting with seizures and vaginal bleeding. ETA 5 minutes. Eliana straightened her white coat, tucked her curls under a surgical cap, and moved swiftly toward trauma room 3. The ER doors burst open just as she reached the nurse's station. A young woman was wheeled in, convulsing, her eyes fluttering wildly, body jerking on the gurney. Blood soaked through the thin cotton gown between her legs. Nurses scrambled around her like clockwork. IVs, vitals, oxygen, heart monitor, while Eliana took command. "What's her name?" she asked sharply. "Maya Lorette, 29. No prior OB records. Says she's 33 weeks along. She just showed up at the ER an hour ago, complaining of abdominal pain. Then she started seizing. No prenatal history." Eliana frowned. "None," the nurse confirmed. "It's like she just appeared." Maya was barely conscious, her pupils dilated, skin clammy. Eliana placed a gloved hand on the woman's belly. The baby's heart was racing. D-cells were sharp, erratic. "This was bad. Very bad. We need to check for placental abruption," Eliana said quickly. "Page NICU. Prep for possible emergency C-section. Let's do a pelvic exam now." A nurse dimmed the lights as Eliana slid on a fresh pair of gloves. Maya groaned faintly, legs trembling in the stirrups. There was too much blood. Eliana inserted the speculum carefully, her trained fingers feeling for signs of dilation, of rupture, anything to explain the sudden hemorrhage. That's when she felt it. Something hard, wedge-shaped, not tissue, not bone. Her brows furrowed. "Give me suction," she murmured. The nurse obeyed. Eliana leaned closer. Her gloved fingertips brushed the object again, cold and stiff. She blinked. It wasn't a medical instrument. It didn't belong there. She reached in carefully with forceps and pulled it into view. Time stopped. The object was a human finger, severed cleanly at the middle knuckle. The skin was pale, shrunken, wrinkled like it had been preserved. Eliana's eyes locked on something even more chilling. A small tattoo just beneath the fingernail. 3 tiny letters. E.G. Her knees buckled. "No," she whispered. Her heart thundered in her ears. She stared at the finger, paralyzed, as if her brain couldn't process what her eyes were seeing. It was hers, her missing finger. 5 years ago, she'd been in a horrific car accident, rear-ended by a hit-and-run driver on the Crescent City Bridge. She'd survived, but her left pinky had been severed in the wreck. Emergency responders never found it. The doctors had told her it likely washed into the river, lost forever. But now it was here, inside the womb of a woman she'd never met, inside the body of a patient she was trying to save. "Eliana," a nurse's voice broke the silence. "You okay?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her gloved hand shook as she held up the finger, encased in a sterile tray. She backed away, trying not to hyperventilate. This wasn't just a medical anomaly. It was a goddamn nightmare. "Eliana, are you bleeding?" She looked down. Blood was everywhere, on her scrubs, on the floor, soaking the pads under Maya's body. The baby was in distress. She had no time to fall apart. "Eliana," the NICU nurse called out, "we're losing fetal heart tones. Do we go now?" Eliana snapped back into focus. She shoved the tray aside, tore off her gloves, and reached for new ones. "Yes. Get her to OR. Now. We have 6 minutes, maybe less." The surgical team moved like a machine. Within moments, they were in the OR, the bright lights overhead illuminating Maya's pale, sweat-soaked face. Eliana worked mechanically, her mind split. Half surgeon, half terrified woman trying to process the impossible. Her own finger, inside a stranger. After 5 years. Scalpel. Retractors. Clamp. Suction. She didn't think, she acted. Like a soldier in a war she didn't understand. The baby came out blue. Not breathing. But after 30 seconds of resuscitation, a high-pitched wail cut through the air. A boy, small but alive. Eliana held him for a beat, eyes burning. Then she passed him to the nurse and turned back to Maya, who was still unconscious, her vitals dropping. Post-op, Maya was stabilized and moved to ICU. The baby to NICU. The finger was placed in a biohazard tray and sent for testing, though Eliana didn't need a lab to tell her what she already knew. It was hers, down to the birthmark on the nail bed, down to the tattoo she'd gotten during her second year of med school, a stupid dare from her roommate that became a badge of pride. And now, a key to something far darker. She went to the staff bathroom and locked the door, leaned over the sink, stared at her left hand. 4 fingers. She touched the stump of her missing pinky, the scar now throbbing, like some phantom nerve had awakened after years of silence. Her reflection stared back at her, pale, trembling, haunted. She had questions, millions of them. How did it get there? Who put it there? Why now? But more than anything, she had a feeling in her gut, something deep and primal. A warning. This wasn't medicine. This was a message. And someone, somewhere, wanted her to receive it. Dr. Eliana Graves didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. The hospital gave her the option to go home early after the trauma, but she refused. She stayed in the staff lounge long after the surgical team dispersed, long after Maya Lorette had been stabilized and moved to the ICU, and long after the newborn boy had been placed safely under heat lamps in the NICU. The severed finger, her finger, had been handed off to pathology for analysis, but the image of it was burned into her mind, permanent and unrelenting. She sat in silence, staring at her left hand. She'd grown used to its absence, the missing pinky, learned how to perform delicate surgeries without it, made jokes about it at holiday parties, even told herself, more than once, that maybe losing it had made her stronger. A scar you carry with grace, she used to say. But tonight it didn't feel like a scar. It felt like a thread. And whoever left that finger inside Maya Lorette wanted her to feel exactly that. At 3:16 a.m., her pager buzzed. Pathology report ready. ID confirmed. She didn't need confirmation, but she read every word. Severed left 5th digit, partial distal phalanx missing. Preserved tissue, minimal decomposition. Initial DNA extraction consistent with Dr. Eliana Graves' match, 99.9996%. Estimated time outside body, variable. No decomposition consistent with natural burial or exposure to elements. Likely chemically preserved. Eliana dropped the report. Chemically preserved, which meant someone had kept it, stored it, maintained it for years. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a twisted coincidence. This was intentional. 5 years ago, she'd been in a car accident. She remembered fragments, the blaring horn, the crash of metal, the way her car flew over the bridge railing like a stone skipping off water. She remembered waking up in the hospital days later, groggy, in pain, and being told she'd survived a freak rear-end collision. The driver of the other vehicle had fled the scene and was never found. And the finger? Gone. Presumed lost in the river. But now it had come back. And not in a bag. Not in a box. Inside a pregnant woman. Eliana stood, suddenly needing air. She left the lounge and wandered the halls until she found herself outside the NICU window. The baby lay inside, swaddled tightly, a breathing tube nestled against his nose. A nurse walked by and said gently, "He's a fighter. You did good, Dr. Graves." Eliana forced a nod, her eyes never leaving the child. Whose child was he, really? Maya Lorette had no prenatal records, no known OB visits, no insurance. She didn't even seem to know she was pregnant until it was too late. According to her intake form, she lived alone. No emergency contacts, no partner listed. It didn't add up. Eliana turned and headed toward ICU. Maya was awake, barely. The room was dim, with the beep of machines cutting through the silence. Maya looked fragile under the white sheets, small, pale, hollow-cheeked. Her wrists were bruised, likely from the seizure. Her lips moved slowly when Eliana entered. "Doctor." Eliana sat beside her. "You're stable now." The baby's in NICU. He's doing okay. Maya blinked, then closed her eyes like she hadn't heard. A moment later, she whispered, "Something's wrong with me." "What do you mean?" "I don't know. I wake up in places I don't remember. With marks on me. Like someone did something." Eliana froze. "What kind of marks?" Maya turned her head slowly to the side. "Stitches. Here." She motioned weakly to her lower abdomen. "I've had them before, but no one believes me." Eliana stared. "Did you have surgery?" "I don't know," Maya said. "They say I'm crazy, that I dream it, but sometimes I wake up sore, like I was opened up." A cold ripple moved down Eliana's spine. "Maya," she said carefully, "have you ever had blackouts before?" Maya nodded slowly. "Since 3 years ago, after the fire." "What fire?" "The one in Gentilly. My foster mom's house burned down. She didn't make it. I was in the hospital for weeks. They said I was lucky. But after that, everything's been blurry." Eliana felt something slide into place, like a puzzle piece long missing. 3 years ago, a fire, blackouts, stitches, no memory. And now, her own finger found inside Maya's body. She wanted to ask a million things, but Maya was already drifting back to sleep, her eyelids heavy with sedatives. Eliana stepped out and made a decision. She went straight to records, pulled Maya's file. Nothing before age 17. No birth certificate on file. No records from foster care, except one transfer slip from a psychiatric facility in Baton Rouge. Just a line scribbled in faded ink. Patient exhibits signs of dissociation, possible trauma-related fugue states. Memory unreliability likely. Eliana shut the file. Someone had been tampering with Maya's body, maybe for years, implanting things, testing her, and using her, somehow, as a vessel. Or worse, as a carrier. Back in her office, Eliana pulled out the only thing she had from the night of her own accident, a weathered manila envelope given to her by a first responder. Inside were photos of the crash site, the mangled car, the broken guardrail, and a grainy image of tire tracks leading off the road. She hadn't looked at it in years, but now one image caught her eye, a reflection, in the window of her crumpled car, just before the roof caved in. A blurred silhouette standing behind the wreckage. A man, tall, broad shoulders, wearing what looked like scrubs. Eliana's breath caught. She scanned the crash report again. There had never been any witnesses, but someone had been there, and that someone took her finger, preserved it, waited, and now returned it, like a calling card. Eliana sat back, heart racing. Whoever did this had been watching her, studying her, maybe even following her career. And now, for whatever reason, they wanted her attention. They wanted her to remember. But remember what? She didn't know yet, but she intended to find out. 5 years ago, Eliana Graves had everything. At 33, she was a rising star in New Orleans medical community, a newly certified OB-GYN with a full-time position at Tulane Medical Center and a residency award for outstanding surgical precision. She was engaged to Dominic Ward, a cardiothoracic surgeon with a brilliant smile and an even sharper reputation. People called them the golden couple, two high-functioning professionals, respected, admired, envied. But on a rainy Thursday night in early spring, her life crashed, literally, into darkness. She had just left her final shift at Tulane before a long weekend off. She and Dominic had plans, a getaway to Asheville, a cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and maybe, just maybe, setting a wedding date. She remembered looking down at her phone as she pulled onto the bridge over the Mississippi River, seeing a text from Dominic. "Don't be late. I love you." Then came the headlights. They appeared from nowhere, a blinding flash in her rearview mirror followed by the sound of tires screeching and metal crumpling like foil. The SUV hit her from behind at over 80 miles per hour, sending her compact sedan spinning, flipping, crashing through the guardrail. Her car plunged into the river. She remembered the water rushing in, cold and violent, her lungs seizing as she gasped. Her left hand slammed against the steering column, something tearing through her flesh. She tried to scream, but the water swallowed it. Then nothing. She woke up 3 days later in the ICU with a breathing tube in her throat and Dominic at her bedside. He wasn't crying, just staring at her like he was looking at someone else. The doctors told her she was lucky to be alive. The airbag and seatbelt had saved her, but they couldn't save her hand. Her left pinky was gone, severed in the wreck, the tissue too mangled for reattachment. "What happened to it?" she asked weakly. "We couldn't find it," the nurse had said. "Most likely, it was lost in the river." The police said the driver of the SUV had vanished. No license plate caught, no witnesses, no surveillance. The case stayed open for 2 months, then quietly closed, unsolved. Eliana had tried to move on, tried to heal, but something in her changed after the crash. And so did Dominic. He became distant, cold. He canceled the trip, postponed the wedding. Eventually, he stopped answering her calls altogether. Then, 2 weeks after she was discharged, he sent a 3-line email. "Eliana, I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. Please don't contact me. Dominic." She never saw him again. At first, she thought the trauma had scared him off, that some part of her, now incomplete, damaged, had repulsed him. She internalized the pain, blamed herself, but deep down, something never sat right. Why had he changed overnight? Why did he never visit again after that first day? And why had he lied about something so small and yet so important? Because the morning after the crash, while she was still groggy from painkillers, Dominic had leaned over and whispered, "They found your finger, but it was too damaged to save. I'm so sorry." But the hospital staff later told her the opposite. The finger was never recovered. So why would he say that? Why lie about something so specific? Unless he knew where it went. That lie had haunted her for years, small but persistent, like a pebble in her shoe. She never confronted him, never got the chance. He disappeared. His social media accounts vanished. His name no longer appeared in the hospital directory. When she asked around, his colleagues shrugged and said he'd moved out of state. Changed numbers. No forwarding address. Eliana tried to forget. She poured herself into her work, took extra shifts, focused on her patients. But the scar on her left hand was a daily reminder of what she lost and what was taken. She never got closure. Until now. Because that finger, the one found inside Maya, was pristine. Preserved. Marked with her tattoo. It hadn't been lost in muddy river water or chewed up in twisted metal. It had been saved, stored, hidden, and now it was back. Someone had held on to it for 5 years. Cared for it. Preserved it in chemicals. And then inserted it into a pregnant woman's body as if it were part of a sick message. That finger, Eliana whispered to herself. It was never just evidence. She stared at the photo of it, preserved, pale, perfect, a part of her stolen, then returned like a gift wrapped in threat. He didn't just keep it. He curated it, maintained it, waited. He wanted me to know, not just that he'd hurt her, but that he still owned a piece of her. This wasn't a breadcrumb. This was dominion, a sick signature, a message carved from flesh. You survived me, but you'll never be free. It made her nauseous, and yet strangely clear-headed, because if Dominic had lied about the finger, and if Dominic had disappeared without explanation, and if someone had been following her, tracking her movements, monitoring her career, just waiting for the right moment to make their move, it had to be him. No one else knew what that finger looked like. No one else knew about the tattoo she got during a wild night in med school. E.g., her initials etched in tiny script on the underside of her nail bed, a joke between her and her roommate. No one but Dominic. And now Maya Lorette, a woman with no history, no prenatal care, and a past full of blank spots, was suddenly carrying Eliana's finger inside her. This wasn't random. This was personal. This was a breadcrumb. And Dominic Ward was the only man who could have left it. She just had to find him. For the next 72 hours, Dr. Eliana Graves didn't sleep much. She didn't go home. She lived inside the walls of St. Augustine Medical Center, bouncing between the NICU to check on the baby, the ICU to monitor Maya's vitals, and the records department where she tore through files like a woman possessed. Because something about Maya Lorette didn't make sense. Women don't just show up 9 months pregnant with no medical history, no family, no support, then go into seizures on a hospital floor and deliver a child with a severed finger buried in their womb. Something was wrong, very wrong, and Eliana knew the only way to make sense of her own nightmare was to understand Maya's. She started by requesting Maya's intake forms and ID. There wasn't much. A Louisiana state ID, issued 3 years ago. No birth certificate on file. Social security number was legitimate but newly generated, dated just 6 months prior. The address she gave at check-in turned out to be a halfway house for homeless women in the lower Ninth Ward. When Eliana called, a weary caseworker answered. Maya Lorette, the woman, echoed. Yeah, she stayed here a few months last year. Quiet girl, real broken, barely spoke. Then she disappeared. Disappeared? Eliana asked. No forwarding address? Nope. She left one night with nothing but a plastic bag of clothes. We filed a report, but girls like her fall through the cracks all the time. Eliana pressed harder. Do you know where she came from? Foster system, the woman said. She bounced around a lot. Mental health history. Was in some kind of institution after a fire a few years back. A fire. That was the second time Eliana had heard that word. She dug deeper. Pulled state foster records. Pieced together fragments. Maya had been placed into foster care at age 11 after her biological mother died of an overdose. Her father, unknown. From 11 to 18, she passed through 7 different homes, 3 counties, and 2 emergency shelters. Behavioral issues, night terrors, blackouts, dissociation. Then, at 24, she was listed as a survivor of a residential fire in Gentilly. Her foster mother at the time had died in the blaze. Maya had no burns, but was treated for smoke inhalation and a ruptured spleen. Eliana blinked. Spleen ruptures don't happen from smoke. The medical record indicated internal trauma. Emergency surgery. But the notes were vague. No surgeon listed. No hospital name. Only transferred to private care facility. That was a red flag. She called in a favor with a friend at the Department of Health and Human Services. After a few hours of coaxing and a legally questionable coffee bribe, the friend emailed her something that made her skin crawl. A scanned intake form from a private psychiatric facility in Baton Rouge. Patient, Maya Lorette. Admission reason, found disoriented after fire. Present signs of dissociation. Observation notes, unusual surgical scarring on lower abdomen. Patient claims no memory of procedure. States, I think someone opened me up. Eliana exhaled shakily. This was no longer just about a missing finger. This was about a young woman who'd been cut open, altered, and then dumped back into the world with no memory and no family. And now Maya was pregnant with a baby whose origin no one could trace and a uterus that might have been medically manipulated. Eliana requested a full scan. She scheduled a post-op pelvic MRI under the guise of checking for internal bleeding. What the scan showed made her stomach turn. Maya's uterus had multiple layers of internal scarring, the kind you might see in someone who had undergone experimental transplants or embryo implantation procedures. Her ovaries had fine stitch marks, barely healed. She'd been operated on, recently, and not by professionals. Eliana immediately brought in Dr. Anna Singh, a reproductive endocrinologist she trusted. Jesus, Anna muttered, scrolling through the scan. This doesn't look like a C-section gone wrong. This looks like lab work. Surgical testing. Why would anyone do this? Eliana didn't answer, because she already had a name on her mind. Dominic. There were too many connections. The surgical precision. The secrecy. The lies. Dominic had been fascinated with boundary-pushing science back when they were together. Stem cells. Organ regeneration. The body is a system to be rewritten, he used to say. It sounded ambitious at the time, maybe even visionary. Now it just sounded dangerous. Eliana pulled up his old research. Dominic had been co-author on a controversial paper 5 years ago about transplanting live tissue into non-matching hosts using synthetic scaffolds. It was laughed out of medical journals, dismissed as unethical pseudoscience. But what if he hadn't stopped? What if he went underground? What if Maya was one of his trials? The idea made Eliana's skin crawl. She returned to Maya's room. The young woman was sitting up, pale and tired, sipping water from paper cup. Her arms trembled slightly as she held it. Maya, Eliana said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Maya blinked slowly. Do you remember anyone ever performing surgery on you? Someone in a lab coat? A man, maybe? A place that didn't feel like a hospital? Maya's lips parted. See flashes, she whispered. Lights. White. Cold. I remember lying down and someone say my name wrong. Calling me patient 3. Eliana's breath caught. Did they hurt you? I think so. I think I had something inside me. A tube. Or something metal. Tears welled in Maya's eyes. Sometimes I think I'm going crazy. But I know something happened. I just don't know why. Eliana reached for her hand. You're not crazy. Someone did this to you. Maya's eyes flicked up, confused. Do you know who? Eliana hesitated. I have a theory, and I'm going to find out. But I need your help. Maya nodded slowly, fear and relief mixing in her gaze. For the first time since this nightmare began, Eliana didn't feel alone. They were both victims. Different traumas. Same monster. And now, she had a name, a face, and a pattern. Dominic hadn't just left her. He had used her. And now he was using others. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about stopping whatever the hell he had started. Eliana Graves had seen a lot in her 15 years of practicing medicine. Stillbirths, uterine ruptures, even a woman who unknowingly carried a calcified fetus for over a decade. But nothing could have prepared her for what she was uncovering now. She wasn't just chasing ghosts or grieving a lost relationship. She was pulling at the threads of something grotesque, something built in the shadows. And it all pointed to human experimentation. She started with the building Maya had mentioned during her fragmented memories, a place with white lights, cold air, the name Patient 3 whispered like a code. It triggered a thought. There were only a handful of private labs in the greater New Orleans area that had gone dark in the last few years. Most had shut down quietly after failing FDA inspections or losing funding. But one caught her attention, Cypress Biomedical Institute. The name rang faint bells. Dominic had once mentioned a colleague who worked there, someone obsessed with stem cell cultivation and multi-host grafting. At the time, Eliana thought it was just overhyped tech bro science babble. But now, she pulled the facility records. Cypress Biomedical had gone bankrupt 4 years ago following an anonymous whistleblower complaint. The report claimed the lab was operating outside ethical bounds, using unapproved stem cell lines, and possibly performing experimental procedures on vulnerable patients without consent. The case had been sealed. No names. No follow-up. But what stood out to Eliana were the architectural records. The building was still standing. Privately owned. Vacant. She drove there herself one humid Thursday morning, parking her car half a block away to avoid drawing attention. The neighborhood had changed since she last drove through it. Graffiti-stained walls, boarded-up gas stations, and the stench of mildew clinging to cracked pavement. Cypress Biomedical stood like a forgotten tombstone. Gray concrete, windows shattered, weeds twisting through the sidewalk. But when she pushed the side door, it opened. Unlocked. Inside, the air was stale. Dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight, slanting through broken panes. Surgical lights hung from the ceiling like skeletal arms. The walls were lined with rusted storage lockers, overturned gurneys, old surgical trays. And then she saw it. In the far corner of what once was a sterile operating suite stood a walk-in refrigeration unit. It was humming, still functional. Eliana's heart pounded as she pulled the latch. Inside were 6 metal drawers, like more cabinets. She opened the top one. Inside was a vacuum-sealed bag, labeled with nothing but a barcode. Through the plastic, she could see a preserved human kidney. Another drawer revealed a heart. Another, a partial liver. Every organ tagged, bagged, and labeled not with names, but with numbers. Eliana stumbled back, ball rising in her throat. This wasn't a lab. It was a butcher shop, and it hadn't shut down. It had just moved underground. She heard a sound, a soft mechanical click, and spun around. A surveillance camera. Tiny, hidden behind a vent. And it was on. Someone was still watching. She got out fast, heart slamming against her ribs as she reached her car and peeled out of the neighborhood. That night, she didn't sleep. Instead, she called a contact from her med school days, Special Agent Marcus Hayes, now with the FBI's Biocrimes Division. At first, he didn't believe her, until she showed him the photos. Within 48 hours, the FBI issued a quiet investigation order and returned to Cypress Biomedical with a forensic team. What they found confirmed Eliana's worst fears. The building had once served as a hub for illicit organ harvesting. Victims, mostly undocumented women, runaways, or people without families, had been abducted, sedated, and operated on. Some had organs removed and replaced with synthetic scaffolds as part of experimental grafting procedures. Others were used as gestational carriers, implanted with embryos created in vitro, then monitored in isolation. Like Maya, her pregnancy, Eliana now realized, wasn't natural. The scarring, the surgical evidence, the dissociation, all pointed to her being a lab rat in someone's Frankenstein fantasy. And it all led back to one person, Dominic Ward. His name wasn't on any of the documents, but there were signatures, alias names, bank records, and one photo, grainy and partial, captured by a delivery driver's dash cam 2 years prior, showed a tall man loading medical crates into the rear of a van outside Cypress Biomedical. The outline was unmistakable. Eliana didn't need a facial recognition scan. She knew that jawline, that posture, that gait. It was him. Dominic hadn't disappeared. He'd gone rogue. And worse, he had patients, victims. When federal agents raided Dominic's offshore accounts, what they found stunned even the most seasoned investigators. Funding didn't just come from shadowy donors or black market biotech brokers. Several large contributions, some masked through shell corporations, were traced back to a well-known biomedical investment firm based in Boston. The company had a clean public image, backing fertility clinics, organ research initiatives, and innovative regenerative medicine. But behind closed doors, they had funneled nearly $4.7 million into a pilot project in offshore medical advancement, led by none other than Dominic Ward, under a pseudonym. These weren't just passive investors. They knew. They'd seen early data, progress reports, tissue compatibility tests. One internal email read, "Results are promising, especially with undocumented female hosts. Legal risk is manageable offshore." Eliana stared at the documents in disbelief. Dominic hadn't worked alone. He had enablers, corporations that looked the other way, people in suits who signed checks while women bled on hidden tables. This wasn't just one man's madness. It was a system dressed in lab coats and boardrooms. Eliana sat across from Agent Hayes 2 days later as he unfolded a file. "We believe Dominic's been operating a covert organ harvesting and synthetic transplant ring for at least 6 years," Hayes said. "He's got offshore funding, possibly connections in Haiti, Colombia, even Germany. He targets people no one looks for, the mentally ill, addicts, undocumented immigrants, sedates them, operates on them, then either discards them or sends them back into the world modified." "Modified?" Eliana echoed, her voice hollow. "Some have foreign organs," Hayes said. "Others, like Maya, have been used to incubate tissue or test implant compatibility. In some cases, they weren't even carrying their own embryos." Eliana felt her skin crawl. The baby, Maya's son, he may not have been conceived naturally at all. And if Dominic was experimenting with genetic hybridization or gestational control, there was a terrifying question lingering in the air. Whose child was it? "Do we know how many victims?" she asked, barely able to breathe. Hayes hesitated. "We've identified at least 23, he said. "But that's just in Louisiana. We think this goes much further." Eliana pressed her palms to her temples. A former lover, a man she almost married, now a butcher hiding behind a scalpel. Hayes leaned forward. "We need your help. You knew him better than anyone. You know how he thinks, what he values, where he might run." Eliana shook her head. "You don't understand. Dominic doesn't run. He plans. Every move, every patient, every body part. He sees it all like a system." Hayes' phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and went still. "They found another site," he said slowly. "Outside Port-au-Prince, Haiti." Eliana's blood turned cold. Haiti. That's where Dominic's mother had grown up. He used to talk about setting up clinics there. "They don't regulate you to death," he once said. "You can really practice medicine there." Hayes stood. "I need to put you under protection," he said. If Dominic knows you're involved, he may try to reach out. Eliana shook her head again. No, he won't reach out. Hayes narrowed his eyes. Why? She stared back, her voice cold. Because he already did. She opened her bag and pulled out the hospital tray photo. The severed finger. Her finger. Left like a gift inside a woman's womb. He was sending her a message. I still own a part of you. But Eliana had her own message now. And it was simple. Not anymore. Eliana Graves no longer cared about ethics. There was a time when she believed medicine was sacred, that the white coat stood for something, that science, even when it failed, could still be pure. But that version of her died the moment she saw her own severed finger in a stainless steel tray, pulled from the body of a woman who had been used like livestock. Now all she wanted was one thing. Dominic Ward. She didn't want to testify. She didn't want to wait for the system to grind into motion while he skipped between countries, carving people up under fake names. She wanted to look him in the eye, make him explain, and then make sure he never touched another body again. Agent Hayes had already warned her. Stay out of this, Eliana. You're a victim, not law enforcement. Let us do our job. But that was the problem. The system had never protected victims like Maya, like the other women whose organs were stuffed in fridges. And it had done nothing for Eliana 5 years ago when Dominic vanished and she woke up missing a piece of herself, physically and emotionally. So this time, she'd take matters into her own hands. She started by digging into the Haiti connection. Dominic's mother had run a small clinic outside of Cap Haitian. She died years ago, but Dominic had inherited the property. Through some quiet online sleuthing, Eliana discovered the building had recently been converted into a private medical NGO, funded anonymously, but using American medical supplies. It wasn't hard to guess who was behind it. The flights were booked under a different name, Eleanor Graves' son. She didn't tell anyone, not even Agent Hayes. She left her hospital badge behind, wiped her phone, brought only a burner, a blood pressure cuff, and the kind of resolve that doesn't allow room for second thoughts. The Haiti she landed in was humid and bright, loud with color and life. Nothing like the cold sterility of Dominic's world. But she wasn't here for beauty. She was here for blood. The clinic sat 2 miles off a dirt road, surrounded by tall cane fields and guarded by no one, at least not obviously. The locals avoided it. Some whispered it was cursed. Others said people went in and never came out. She waited until dusk. Dressed in a faded nurse's uniform she'd stolen from a thrift store in Miami, she approached the rear entrance with steady hands. The door was locked, but the window next to it wasn't, propped open just enough for air or maybe escape. She slipped inside and found herself in hell. The place smelled of bleach, metal, and decay. There were tables with restraints, for bags filled with strange, off-color liquids, bins marked biohazard, overflowing with bloody gauze and surgical gloves. But what struck her most was the wall. A bulletin board lined with photos. Patients, some smiling, some sedated, all labeled with numbers, P1, P2, P3, and there, near the bottom corner, a familiar face. Maya, patient 3. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Eliana crept deeper into the hallway, every nerve on fire. Then she heard it. A voice. Smooth. Confident. You always did follow your instincts, Eliana. That's what made you brilliant. She turned slowly, and there he was. Dominic. Older now. Sharper. Thinner. Dressed in surgical scrubs, blood splattered across the chest. He wasn't surprised to see her. I wonder when you'd come, he said. Her heart slammed against a ribcage. You left me for dead. I saved you, he replied calmly. That finger? You're welcome. It was the start of everything. She clenched her fists. You experimented on me. He shrugged. You were perfect, healthy, young, ideal tissue compatibility. You should feel honored. You used Maya. She was never anyone's daughter, he said flatly. No identity, no family. I gave her purpose. Eliana stepped forward, rage bubbling. You violated her. You turned her body into a lab. He tilted his head. And yet the baby lived. Isn't that your job? To bring life into the world. She wanted to scream. Instead, she reached into her scrubs and pulled the bone-handled scalpel she'd taken from one of the prep tables. Dominic saw it and laughed. You're not built for this. Neither were they, she said coldly. He lunged, faster than she expected. They hit the floor, the scalpel skidding across the tiles. His hands closed around her throat. I made you, he hissed. Every life you've saved since then you owe to me. Her vision darkened. Then instinct kicked in. Her knee shot up hard. He gasped and released her. She scrambled for the scalpel and drove it forward, burying it deep into his side. Dominic collapsed, eyes wide with disbelief. She stood over him, trembling. You didn't make me, she whispered. You broke me, and I put myself back together. He gasped, blood pooling under him. You don't get to be the hero. I don't want to be, she said. I just want you gone. Outside, lights flooded the building. Voices. FBI. They followed her burner signal after all. Hayes was the first through the door. Eliana, he shouted. Hands up. She's clean, another agent barked. Dominic's down, we got him. Hayes rushed to her side. She didn't cry. She didn't collapse. She just stared at Dominic, bleeding out on the floor like the butchered experiments he left behind. A part of her wanted to say something poetic, but there was nothing left to say. Dominic survived the stabbing, barely. He was flown back to the U.S. under federal custody, placed under 24/7 medical supervision, and formally charged with 37 counts of aggravated assault, unlawful experimentation on humans, trafficking of organs, and attempted murder. The trial would become a media storm. But Eliana didn't care about cameras anymore. She'd seen the truth, lived it, bled from it, and now, for the first time in years, she felt whole. Even without that finger, even with the scars. Because some wounds don't close with stitches. Some heal only with vengeance. 6 months later, the eyes of the nation turned to a sterile courtroom in New Orleans. The state of Louisiana versus Dr. Dominic Elias Ward became more than just a criminal case. It became a referendum on medical ethics, on human experimentation, on how far a brilliant mind could go when unbound by conscience. Cable news called it Frankenstein in scrubs. Social media trended with hashtags like hashtag Justice for Maya, hashtag Organ Ring Trial, and hashtag The Finger That Came Back. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse every day, holding signs that read, "Our bodies are not your lab, and this is not science. This is slavery." Inside, the temperature was frigid, both from the courtroom AC and the atmosphere. Federal prosecutors didn't hold back. They charged Dominic with 37 felony counts: illegal organ trafficking, aggravated human experimentation, conspiracy to commit murder, and medical battery. Dominic pled not guilty to all charges. He sat there calmly through every hearing, flanked by 2 cold-eyed defense attorneys. His beard was neatly trimmed, his prison-issued khakis ironed. He didn't flinch when photos of harvested organs were shown to the jury. He didn't blink when Maya Lorette was called to testify. She took the stand trembling, a young woman thrust into national spotlight, her trauma exposed to millions. "I didn't know I was pregnant," she whispered. "I didn't even know someone had been inside me. But I remember lights, tables, cold voices calling me a number. I thought I was crazy for years." Her voice cracked. "I woke up with stitches I couldn't explain. Pain I didn't remember. I tried to tell people. No one believed me. They said it was PTSD. They said I was just unstable." The courtroom was silent. And then, she said, looking at Dominic across the room, "A doctor pulled a severed finger from inside my womb. And everything I tried to forget became real." One juror wiped away tears. Then came the DNA experts, pathologists, federal agents, victims. Woman from El Paso who'd been told she had liver cancer, only to learn later that part of her liver had been removed during a free surgical trial she didn't consent to. Another woman from Tampa testified that she woke up in a Haitian clinic after being drugged on the street in Miami, with 1 kidney missing. Eliana Graves was the last to testify. The courtroom leaned in when she stepped up, the woman who started it all, whose finger had returned from the dead, a symbol of everything Dominic had hidden. She stood tall, confident, but her voice trembled at first. "I loved him once," she began. "We were going to be married. I thought he was brilliant, intense, yes, but visionary. I didn't know then that brilliance without morality is just madness with a scalpel. She told the jury everything. The crash, the missing finger, the lie, the years of silence and suspicion. Then the night Maya came in bleeding. The exam, the discovery, the MRI, the old lab in New Orleans with a walk-in fridge full of human parts. The hidden camera, the clinic in Haiti, the stabbing. She described it all, not with anger, but with quiet, razor-sharp clarity. When I looked at him lying on that floor, bleeding out, she said, I didn't see a man anymore. I saw a monster who thought he could rewrite biology without permission. He didn't believe in human dignity, only in results. The defense tried to paint Dominic as a misunderstood genius, a man ahead of his time, a pioneer in synthetic tissue science who was driven underground by outdated regulations. They argued his patients were willing participants, that he had done more good than harm. But jurors didn't buy it. The evidence was overwhelming. The secret operating rooms, the missing records, the altered bodies, the DNA matches, the bank transfers to offshore accounts, the recovered video footage of Dominic operating on sedated women while classical music played in the background. After 4 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 7 hours. When a verdict was read, the courtroom didn't erupt. It exhaled. On all counts, we find the defendant guilty. Dominic didn't move. Not when the cuffs were placed on him. Not when Maya broke down in tears, holding her son in her lap. Not even when Eliana turned to face him one last time. Their eyes met. No words, just a shared, silent history soaked in blood and betrayal. The sentencing came 2 months later. Life without the possibility of parole. He was transferred to ADX Florence, the most secure federal prison in America, where he'd spend the rest of his days in a solitary cell, away from scalpels, silence, and victims. For many, it was justice. But for Eliana, it was complicated. No sentence could bring back the women whose bodies had been violated, whose wombs had been turned into living test tubes. No punishment could erase the trauma stitched into Maya's skin, or the guilt Eliana still carried for not seeing the truth sooner. Still, she chose to speak to reporters on the courthouse steps. Not for herself, but for everyone Dominic used. Medicine should heal, she said into a sea of microphones. It should protect. It should never, ever become a tool for control or experimentation without consent. What happened to Maya, to all of them, should have never been possible. But it was, because no one was watching. Because people like Dominic think they're untouchable. She paused. And that's why I'll never stop watching now. Eliana Graves never returned to full-time practice. She still wore the white coat occasionally, as a guest lecturer at Tulane, or in volunteer shifts at women's clinics in underfunded neighborhoods. But she no longer walked the halls of a hospital like she used to. Not with the same certainty. Not with the same belief that every patient could be saved. Some scars don't close. Some just settle. In the 6 months after Dominic's conviction, Eliana retreated from public life. The press hounded her for interviews. A dozen publishers offered book deals. Streaming networks wanted to buy the rights to her story. She turned them all down. This wasn't entertainment to her. It was memory. It was blood. She moved to a small home outside Baton Rouge, quiet and wooded, where she could breathe. Most days, she sat on the back porch with a cup of black coffee, left hand resting on the table, the stub of her pinky facing the sunlight. Sometimes she imagined it still there. Phantom sensation. A ghost limb. But more often now, she felt something different. A quiet kind of strength. It was Maya who inspired that. Because Maya Lorette didn't disappear. She could have. God knows she had every reason to vanish into the corners of a system that failed her. Institutionalized, cut open, impregnated without consent. But instead, she chose to survive. Loudly, she filed a civil suit against the medical organizations that had funded Dominic's offshore research. She became the face of the Bodily Autonomy Act, a bill introduced in Louisiana and later echoed nationally, that tightened regulations around experimental medical trials and banned any non-consensual reproductive manipulation. Her son, whom she named Eli, grew fast, healthy, smiling, curious. Eliana visited often. They weren't family by blood, but something deeper connected them. The bond of shared trauma, stitched together by loss and reclaimed power. Sometimes late at night, Eliana would watch Eli sleep and feel her chest tighten. He was a beautiful child, gentle, affectionate, always curious. But there were moments, tiny moments that stirred something uneasy. A look too sharp for his age. A question too precise. A silence too still. And then there were the medical scans. At age 2, Eli's muscle development was slightly accelerated. His immune markers were unusual, borderline hyperreactive. The pediatrician called it likely benign, but Eliana saw it for what it was, a legacy. He had come into this world not by chance, but by design. Not born, engineered. Do you think he'll be okay? Maya once asked her. Eliana didn't answer right away, because she didn't know. The boy had survived horror before he ever drew breath. But what if part of that horror lived inside him? One rainy afternoon, Maya asked her a question. Do you think I'm broken? She said, eyes distant, watching Eli nap beside her. Eliana answered without pause. No, I think you were used, then discarded. And yet here you are, still standing. Maya looked at her. But how do you live knowing someone took your body, your choices? Eliana inhaled slowly. You don't live despite it, she said. You live with it. You carry it. And eventually, it stops bleeding. They didn't cry. They didn't need to. The silence between them was enough. Months passed. A journalist finally convinced Eliana to speak a long-form interview for The New Yorker under the title, The Finger That Came Back, What Medicine Can't Take From Me. It went viral in less than 24 hours. But she didn't give sound bites. She told the truth about the cost of silence, the danger of unchecked brilliance, the illusion of progress when it's built on the backs of the voiceless. She wrote, We celebrate medical miracles, but we rarely ask what was sacrificed to get them. Dominic Ward saw people as parts. He thought he could build a better human being, but he forgot something. We're not bodies alone. We are memory, pain, love, fear, and the right to say no. It became a rallying cry. Medical schools began including the Ward case in their ethics curriculum. The American Medical Association formally revised its consent standards. Donations poured into survivor organizations. And through it all, Eliana stayed mostly quiet. Until one morning, she received a letter. It was forwarded through her hospital. No return address. No signature. Just a folded sheet of paper and a photo. The photo was of a severed hand, not hers, preserved in a jar. On the paper, one sentence. There were more than you knew. Eliana stared at it for a long time. Was it Dominic? Was someone else continuing his work? The FBI reopened their investigation, but leads went cold. She didn't panic. She didn't run. She simply framed the photo, hung in her home office, not as a trophy, not as a warning, but as a reminder. The story wasn't over. Evil doesn't always die in a courtroom. Sometimes it just changes shape. But now the world was watching. Now victims had voices. Now silence had become noise. And Eliana Graves, a woman once defined by what was taken from her, had become something else entirely. A witness, a scar, and maybe a beginning.